so glad to have you on our last episode of Blind Spots. And believe it or not, this is our last week for youth. But today I am so excited to be joined with Megan and Bonnie. And so before we get into it, you guys are going to hear a little bit about who they are, and then we are going to cover the topic of sexism, which is a kind of a meatier topic in the midst of churches and lives of women and all kinds of things in our world. So how about we just start with Megan, explain, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Megan. I actually grew up at Beulah. I've been here since I was 8 years old, so it's kind of home to me. I grew up in Edmonton. My family is a Christian family, so very much had that kind of church kid environment growing up. After finishing high school, I went to take a Bachelor of Music at Grant MacEwan, where my principal instrument was guitar, which is kind of interesting in this topic because very, very few women are in that kind of subsect of the program. As well, after that, I went and I worked for several years as a primary care paramedic in the city for emergency medical services. And then now, because I love school, I just keep going. I'm actually a master's student, and I'm taking my master's of physiotherapy at the U of A.
Wow, that's amazing. So many different outlets. Bonnie, how about you explain a little bit about yourself, job, family?
My name is Bonnie. I work here at Beulah as a pastor, overseeing community impact and crisis care. I have my bachelor in missiology and a master's in pastoral care and counseling. Spent almost 30 years in ministry, and out of that, 5 of that, I worked at a Aboriginal community as a wellness coordinator. Not married, but really connected to my family and to community, and have some really good mentors and friends that are like family to me.
No, that's so good. So as mentioned, today we are talking about sexism, and I want each of you to kind of just explain some of the experiences you have faced in regards to sexism, and how did you kind of respond in those moments. So Bonnie, would you like to share some of your experiences first?
Sure. I was born in the 60s, and for much of my life, my parents taught us how to think independently, how to think in terms that nothing that we did or wanted to achieve was impossible. And I remember when I decided to go into ministry because I felt a compulsion from God after becoming a Christian to apply to Bible college and see where that led. My dad had so much resistance because he felt that I would be put down because I was a woman. And I acknowledged that even then, there was not a female in any of the churches I'd been in that actually had a role of a leader or a pastor or someone that could mentor me. Yes, there was the token female who would speak on Mother's Day, but there was no one. And even when I went to my Bible college, the 2 women who did teach taught the internship program, where she coordinated interns and field education and child education. There was no females even on the professorship of theology, and that's what excited me. And that started my journey of how do I find my voice, whether it's going up against the intern lady and saying, no, I don't want to run an office as my ministry. I actually want to do street ministry. I want to do inner city ministry. And telling me that wouldn't be safe for me because I was a woman, or being told I couldn't go into a board meeting because I was a woman, or being told, having people walk out of the church when I would stand to preach because they didn't agree with women. So I think sexism has taken different forms in church, and as a woman, it is about authority and control, and not about giving someone an opportunity sometimes to develop their gifts and where they feel Jesus is leading. So how do you find that balance in a church? And
Yeah, no, that's so true. And what you said there kind of related to me, because even like me years later, now a pastor, and also gone through Bible college, and like I went in 13. So like still a few years ago, but this is the newer generation. You'd think that there was a little bit of change. And even I experienced the same thing when I did internship. I got up, gonna preach, and then people were leaving. And I was like, what is happening? Like you just feel it, but then you're also like, okay, like these people, they're not used to it. This was new concept to them, and they were taught otherwise. And so it was really just like this disheartening, but also like, man, God's called me to this. I know I have gifts and talents just like anybody else, and I know our youth, there are some girls there that have talents just like I was pursuing when I was younger, and it's like this opportunity was kind of, I don't know, kind of just pulled away from them a little bit because you stood there and then you seen your supports kind of walking away. So it definitely is so challenging. Yeah, no, that's hard. Megan, how about you?
I'd like to talk a little bit about my experience in working in emergency medical services. So it's really interesting in there because emergency medical services is a pretty new profession. Like it just kind of came its own entity in the 80s, which wasn't very long ago. And people tend to still, even though it's been like 40 years later, people still make a very close presumption between EMS and fire. And fire is definitely seen as like a predominantly male environment. And so people really put that presumption on top of EMS as well. But what's really, really interesting is the years, I'm no longer working there now, but the years that I was working there, so it wasn't that long ago, within the last like 5-6 years.
Yeah.
What's really cool is that environment is becoming actually more predominantly female. So it's probably to the point of like maybe like a 60-40 split for females in the field, which is really incredible considering initially there were 0.
Yeah.
And it's seen as more of like a heavy labor manual type job, and where traditionally female in the medical field were more like nursing and caregiving roles. So I was really excited to see like there's so many like ladies in my hiring class, and then there were some like female supervisors, and so I was really excited about the opportunity in like a traditionally male dominated environment to be able to be in there and feel like I was like a part of the team and respected. And that was my impression going in, and it really didn't pan out that way. The amount of times I've like walked into calls, and the first thing somebody says to me, I'll introduce myself. I'm like, hey, we're gonna go, we're gonna get in the ambulance and I'm gonna drive you. They're like, uh-oh, woman driver, haha, are we gonna make it? Like, it has happened countless times. I'm like, I just met you. I'm here to take care of you. Is it really appropriate to be insulting?
Yeah.
And in instances like that, something that when I kind of first started and you're kind of finding your legs and you're just trying to do a good job on the medical side, let alone on like some of the politics in the industry, a lot of people, like I would kind of look to the other female crew members, or like kind of a senior crew member that might be a male, but I'm like, they seemed really nice and seemed respectable. And they either kind of crack a joke with them, or I was like, that really bothered me. And afterwards they'd be like, you just got to let it roll off your back. It just happens all the time. You just have to roll with it. And I was like, that makes me really uncomfortable because I shouldn't
Have to roll with it.
Exactly. It's not like it's disrespect. It's initially just seeing me walk in, people are making a presumption about my abilities instead of thinking, hey, she got hired on, she's done all the training, she's 100% capable of doing this job. And I feel like one of the most frustrating ones, and it's been a really interesting experience going through that job and kind of learning how to temper my responses of like, yes, your sexism is not like you're dying, that's the predominant issue right now, or like you're sick and you need to go. But also being like, I do deserve respect, and I deserve to be here, and I do a good job because I'm a good employee. I'm not good at it despite being a woman. Like, you're not pretty good for a girl. Like, it's not how that works. And I had a patient one time, and we had come in, we were kind of taking care of him, and he just looks at me and he's like, I didn't know they let women do this now. I was like, excuse me? And I was it's so infuriating. But I just kind of stopped and I took that moment and I was like, well, actually, do you know, it's probably more predominantly 60% to 40% women in this job, and we've been doing it for a long time, and everyone's just as good.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, okay, and kind of just left it there.
Well, yeah, and it's hard too because like you said, and Bonnie, you've also referred to, every one of us have the exact same training as those in the other side. So it's like comparing to men in the jobs that we're in. Yes, they're probably more predominant sometimes, but also women are starting to explore these areas more because we should be allowed. Like there's no reason that we can't. And you compare degrees or work and ethic, it's the same level, if not, I don't know, sometimes more. So the fact that we experience this and go in our daily jobs and our daily callings that God has given us, and then we also feel these setbacks, it's very, very challenging. And so how do you guys see your faith intersecting with this? Because it is a challenging topic. We experience it sometimes daily, sometimes once in a blue moon, right? But it's still there. And so when it happens, like in those moments, Megan, how do you see your faith intersecting with that, or Jesus in the midst of it?
I think it's important to remember that God does not put out inferior products. He doesn't have the factory line of like, this was our A line, which is our males, and this is our B line, and they're like pretty good in some things too. Like God doesn't create people who are intrinsically inferior to others.
Yeah,
and I
good.
think I think it's important to recognize that this idea that women are inferior is something that's been created over thousands of years of society. It's not something that's intrinsic properties. Mm-hmm. And so it's like we are fearfully and wonderfully made as individuals. And I don't believe that, you know, God took like the sticker stamp of like, hey, these are females, this is our general template. And, you know, each has their own kind of, their own little extra thing, but it's mostly the same. Like, we're all completely unique. Our brains work in like beautifully unique ways. And I think to relegate people to one subsect of like, of an area, in this case gender, is insulting, not only to us, but like to God's so much more creative than that.
Yeah.
And if you look throughout like the Bible, even in like a historically incredibly sexist time, like I've had people say like, I don't want to go to church because you read the Bible, it's so sexist. You look at it and it's history, but if you look at the touches of God working throughout the Bible, there's a constant elevation of those who are seen as less than or the oppressed. There's like women being given amazing opportunities. You see Esther, Jael, Deborah, you Phoebe. You see Jesus going ahead of his way to elevate women. And at that point, like in that point in history, women are property. Like they're not seen as their own individual beings with like rights, with a seat at the table. Like they're pretty much ignored in every subsect other than to produce babies. So we see like story after story of like Jesus elevating women, making the point of talking to them and like defending them when people don't do that. And I think just even looking at the example of Jesus, how can we possibly say that one gender is inferior? Like if we're looking at Christ's example, he's very much counterintuitive to that.
No, that's so good. And yeah, like you even mentioned Esther, like she had to fight for it, but Esther was so powerful in the Bible, and like that story just reigns on through to her people, and she is the testament in that of like bringing things to life, and it's just so powerful. And I think if we look at those things and those perspectives, our lives can certainly be changed. And we can also, those that are experiencing sexism, well, we can also look to that and be, I feel like, look at even you guys and feel positive about what's happening and how we can change sexism and address it when we see it. And so, Bonnie, how about for you? Like, how does your faith intersect in the midst of your experiences with sexism?
I think to launch off what both you and Megan has said, Jesus crossed the lines when it came to social standing, race, and gender. He did not treat people because a certain way because of their religious order or what culture they came from, what color they were, or what gender they were. He treated people and gave them life, love, grace, based on the fact that we were all created in the image of God. I think the scripture that really speaks loudly to me is the one found in Micah, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before my God. I don't have a problem with the first two. I have a problem with the last one, to walk humbly, because the hard part of being a female, and because I have the added measure of being single, which is quite different in our church culture as well, being a single female in ministry who has leadership gifts, means that I struggle constantly with what that looks like to walk humbly before God. What are the things that God is putting in my hand? What are the things that He's compelling me to do? But how do I still give that over to Him and be able to walk that out humbly before Him and still act justly, love mercy, and still do what He's called me to do? I think for me, it's that combination of knowing deep down that, yes, Jesus has given us a great example of how everyone is to be treated equal, but also He's given us a great example that we all have purposes and callings in our life, compulsions that He is asking us to do, whether today, whether next year, whether the year coming, that we have to walk in obedience.
Yeah.
And what that looks like for each of us, whether female or male, I think shouldn't look different. So,
yeah, I totally agree. And that, like, walking in obedience, that is huge no matter who it is. Like, our youth, that's a prayer for me and our youth here, is that they would just walk in God's calling, walk in the obedience wherever God leads, whatever field that is. Some would be out of our country working, some would be becoming a firefighter, others might be pastors, others might be doctors, and it could be they are janitors, but even in whatever position they are, it's that they would just walk in their calling, in the light of God, in the love of God, and then just stand out for that. Because I think to our lives also, if we stand up for these things, that'll show, and that speaks for itself as well. Like, it's not to be silent, but it's also to know that your life and your actions, just like Megan has said so many times, the actions and the words that come in your mouth, they also stand and represent sexism and the things that are going on in our world. So bringing that and realizing that every day when you wake up, it's like, hey, my life has an impact. And bringing that forward and walking in that. And I hope our youth just always remember that. And yeah, if they do, well, my goodness, I think we'll have great youth. But I'm biased, so, you know. So if there's one thing that you would like to share with those experiencing sexism and are trying to raise their voice to women in the field and their rights, what would you like to say to them? And let's go with Bonnie first.
Canada is a very patriarchal society. I think we see sexism in some shape or form in many of our fields, even in ones that are traditionally female. When males come in, we see an elevation to leadership with men. We see an elevation of salaries to men versus women. Even in Alberta, women still generally have 30% less salaries than men when it comes to equal positions. Not in every company, not in every church, and not in every position. But that is something to consider. What we see in Canada as well is that 1 in 3 women are in some way sexually assaulted, molested, or accosted every year. And that is about violence, but it's also about domination and control. So what I would say to young women, especially youth, is I guess going back 30 years, 40 years to when I was in a church, I can't be called to leadership, I can't be called to ministry because there are no women around me. I think every generation as women, in order for us to combat sexism, is we need to mentor. We need to be able to say to the person that's a generation behind us or farther down from us, yes, you can. Here's some of my lessons. Here, let me pave the way so it's a little bit easier for you. And being able to have these conversations about what it looks like when your supervisor chooses not to take you out for lunch because you're a woman, because it seems inappropriate, or not to invite you to golf because that's a man thing, not a woman thing. Or that your denomination chooses not to have you speak because you're a female and that wouldn't be received well in the congregation. How then do you still lead? How then do you find your voice as a woman leader and be able to do what God has purposed in your life to do? And I think that's important. It rests on me. I think it's a problem. Sexism is a problem all genders face. We need to be able to combat it. But I think I really have a responsibility. Megan really has a responsibility to be able to be that mentor for others who are coming up.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Absolutely.
And so, Megan, the same question for you. If there was one thing, maybe two, that you would like to share with those experiencing sexism and trying to help raise their voice for women's rights, what would you like to say?
Okay, so I want to get to the point of how we act and what we say is really, really important. And it's easy to feel like some of these issues that have kind of been talked about the last couple of weeks, it's like, oh, well, it was worse, 40 years ago, it was worse. And our parents, our grandparents' generation. And so people maybe don't really see it as much of an issue. But something that I think is so important is we need to be really aware how we're propagating sexism within our society, and maybe it looks a little bit different now than it did, when my grandma was a teenager, but it still causes impact. So something that I think is super, super important is don't let stuff slide. The amount of times, even if it's, somebody makes a joke or somebody makes a little comment, and as a woman, especially like growing up, like and being young, sometimes it's really hard to be the person to be like, hey, that's not cool, and you don't want to be that girl because then they're gonna be like, oh, well, she's a feminist, whatever, and like not a dirty term, but but people immediately think that you're overreacting or you're getting too upset and you need to calm down. Like that's very much a response by people, and I think if we words are really important, and if we let little jokes and little comments slide, that continues to propagate the idea that women are inferior, even if it is in a joking context. So we need to be willing to find ways to counteract that in the conversation. Don't just, let it brush off your back, because if that person says it to you, who's listening, who's going to think that's okay? Who else are they going to say it to? Are they going to say it to somebody you may feel like, well, that's not me. They may say it to somebody else who takes that to heart. Like, it's really important to start having these conversations with people and learning how to stop that conversation. And it's kind of hard to learn how to do that, because sometimes the response, at least for me, learning to respond appropriately has been difficult because you're just so angry. And unfortunately, when it comes to sexism, men don't like confrontational women. So if you get angry, and sometimes anger is justified and is an appropriate response. I'm not saying it's never, but sometimes you kind of have to read who you're talking with, because as soon as you kind of get up in arms about it, then they're immediately going to that it's not going to be a discussion. It's just going to be, well, there's just another angry chick, and that's kind of where it ends. But finding ways to kind of make people look at their intent. So if somebody makes a sexist joke, even kind of being like, what do you mean by that? And just making them explain it. Because oftentimes they're like, oh, you know what I mean. You're like, no, what does it mean? And if they actually have to say, well, because you're a girl, you're going to be worse at this, it makes the intent behind the comment so much more obvious. And so you can be like, well, isn't that sexist? Or why would you think I'm inferior just because I'm a woman? Or it kind of opens a conversation rather than just being angry. And because we want to have, as frustrating as it is, we do want to have these discussions with people, because if nobody reasonable ever has these discussions, it's not going to It's not going to
Nothing's
change.
going to come from it.
So, like, be empowered to say things. If you don't feel that way, go like grab somebody who supports you and like have them be part of the conversation. Learn different ways to communicate with people that, you know, you're able to point out what you're saying is not okay, but also in a way that facilitates discussion. And I also want to say, like, shout out for like the young men. It is so important. I know in the last couple weeks, I'm sure you've been talking a lot about like opportunities we have because of our privilege. And again, with sexism, with women, if somebody is sexist, you can say whatever you want and be as logical as you want, and they just may choose to not take what you say because you're a woman. So young men have a really important opportunity to be able to go and stand up and be like, hey man, that's not okay, or like, why would you say that? You know, you're inferring that they're worse or whatever. Like, it's really important that guys not get caught up in that, well, you know, like, he's my bro mentality, and you know, you don't speak up against the guy, like you automatically side with them over, because you don't want to be that guy. But you should be that guy, because if you truly believe in overcoming that injustice that's created within sexism, then like, you have a responsibility. You can't be the person who stands there and watches or thinks that maybe she'll stand up for herself, and if she doesn't, then, you know, she's not that bothered by it. Like, it's really important that it's something that we work with together, and especially like, if you see somebody who's struggling and having that experience, whether they say anything or not, that should be your responsibility as somebody who wants to be like Christ and wants to fight against injustice and stand up for those. Like, maybe, you know, she's fully ready to stand up for herself, but like, it's really nice to have somebody have your back. And like, that's so important. And when we address sexism, like Bonnie was saying, it affects all genders. If you think about men who experience discrimination for qualities or things that they participate in that aren't traditionally masculine, so things such as maybe they're really in touch with their emotions, maybe they work in traditional caregiving goals, like careers like nursing or childcare, maybe they love design and fashion or baking, or, you know, like things of a, you know, considered a feminine aesthetic. They experience discrimination because of that, and we have to trace back, why is that? Why do people say, oh, you know, don't be such a girl? Like, why is that an insult? Why do you, oh, well, you know, that's, you're not a real man if you like that kind of stuff. People say that because feminine is considered inferior. So things that we associate with femininity, if a man now partakes in that, then he's now considered less than or inferior to. So sexism against women affects men, and I think that's why it's not just a women problem to tackle. We all need to combat this, because yes, we should stand up for women, but it also affects everyone.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think like standing up for, bringing awareness, and just using your voice and exposing, no matter where you are to, what you're doing, that is huge. And I think that is one of the biggest things our youth can gain from this and learn. And I'm excited to actually hear what they are going to talk about in their small groups tonight, because I feel like this is going to like really stir up some things for them. But yeah, any last words before we just say our good night and hello to them?
I think for me, the advice that I am constantly giving to women, and this is across generations, is to find your voice and to raise it up. In whatever situation that may be. That may be that as a woman, you desire to be a stay-at-home mom. That's okay. It's totally okay. Or you desire to work in a non-traditional field. That's okay. Or you desire to be a leader. That's okay. But you have to learn young how to raise your voice. How to raise your voice when you're in class, how to raise your voice when you're in with friends, how to be able to ask questions but also share your opinion, and practice that. Practice that with your family, practice that with your friends, because it's not easy, because of that sexism within our culture that says that women are to be subservient, to be quiet, to be respectful. And then when we raise our voice, we're challenged that we are difficult, or we're bossy, or the other words that people like to say in front of your face or behind your back. And be okay that that's going to happen. You have to be okay. I remember when I was starting out in ministry, my senior pastor and his wife sitting me down and saying, Bonnie, you're a woman. You're going to have to work harder, work longer, and speak louder. You're going to have to find your voice so that you can be the leader God has called you to be. And I think that is part of, that would be the last thing I'd have to say.
Yeah, no, that's so good.
Yeah.
Megan, any last words?
Yes. It's just so important because we will have to work harder and speak louder, and there is tremendous pressure in those environments to remember that your gender does not exclude you from anything. If anything, this is your, it works in your benefit, that this is an opportunity that you can take steps that will make it easier for the next generation coming up. And like Bonnie said, you might have to accept that some of these things will happen, that you'll have sexist experiences, and you can be frustrated and you can stand up against them, but also be grateful that you have the chance to address them so other people won't have to. So in the future, that maybe a sexist experience in a workplace or in church or in the family will be kind of more of a one-off experience rather than like a common experience throughout an entire generation.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, ladies, thank you so much. This has been so helpful. I appreciate all of these words, and I think, like our small groups are going to have so much to talk about. And it's also just stirring up things in me that I'm like, man, like we've walked through so much, but there's so much more that we need to just be vocal about and see more present in our world and to act on that. And I think anybody in our youth group can take action. Just like you guys have said, this is not just for women, it is also for men. And so seeing everybody in action to bring awareness is the biggest thing ever. And so Bonnie, would you mind just closing us out and praying before we go to our small groups?
Sure. Father God, we thank you so much that you've given us this opportunity, not just this week, but these last few weeks, to talk about the isms in our lives, to talk about the blind spots that we're not even aware of. So as we go into our small groups, I pray that you will continue to work in our hearts, continue to call us to attention when we have these things that are happening that we're not even aware of it ourselves. I pray that you will put people of accountability in our lives who will help us and to help us grow, but also that we will continually go back to your example of how you treated all people in your image. In your name we pray. Amen.